What we're seeing right now, it's just this convergence of so many different factors coming together.
Massive displacement, forced migration, conflict driven by our warming climate.
It's devastating lives.
All of the good work that we've done over decades stands to be lost. It will unravel if we do not address this issue.
Well, that was the forest maker, Tony Rinaudo, in our last episode. We were talking about the impact of climate change on the world's most vulnerable people. And we want to talk a little bit about Canada's role. So I'm really delighted that we are joined today by Annamie Paul, who is the leader of the Green Party of Canada. And we're also joined today by Alana Maskell, direct from Juba, South Sudan. Alana, you're basically turning Canadian international assistance into action on climate mitigation and programs for vulnerable women, girls, and boys. Ms. Paul, I'll start with you. From your seat, as you look at the impact globally, what is at stake and why should it matter?
Because we are part of this world. And I would say that if anything we've learned during this pandemic, it's been how interconnected we all are and how the decisions we make here impact people a world away and vice versa. And the climate is really one of the most important examples of that. We know that it is having an impact on us in every conceivable way. If we're hoping to have a livable world for ourselves and other living things on it, we all have a stake in it. We all have a role to play.
Alana, you're in South Sudan, and we're hearing that right now in East Africa, COVID has certainly had an ongoing impact along with conflict and climate change. Climate really acts as like it multiplies the threats that vulnerable populations have. Tell us a little bit about your view from the ground in South Sudan.
It's really disturbing. So what we're seeing right now, it's just this convergence of so many different factors coming together. Of course, there's been decades of war, which have really chipped away at like the infrastructure, seeing localized conflict. But sometimes that localized conflict is over natural resources. They are heavily affected by climate change. Like you can see in the past, even 5-6 years, the rainy season moving around when it starts. Land is ample. Sometimes we're seeing water is not so easily available. It's really disturbing things. And so it's affecting the way that when people plant and how they can plant and when they can reap, it's extending the lean season. So in a country where there shouldn't be any hunger, all of a sudden we're seeing a projected almost 6 million people who are going to be facing food insecurity. It means that people have to choose when they're going to eat, if they're going to eat in the morning or if they're going to eat for that day, or who in their family is going to eat. So it's really difficult decisions that people have to make because of climate change.
We often think about this as actually a justice and a human rights issue. Is it right to think of climate this way, climate justice? Is that the right approach?
We speak of climate justice and its interconnectivity again with social justice. In general, the people who suffer the worst and the first in terms of the negative impacts of our warming planet are those who are the least responsible. That's again the countries that really are not even registering on the map in terms of contributing to greenhouse gas emissions are the ones that are being threatened in the ways that Alana described in terms of massive displacement, forced migration, conflict. So as we tackle the climate emergency and seek climate justice, there is no possibility of achieving that without also at the same time working to achieve the greatest amount of social justice as well. So if we say that access to clean drinking water, access to a livable environment, the right not to be displaced, the right to be free, to live free of conflict, these things are all human rights. And then once you recognize it and recognize that the right is under threat, and that perhaps in the case of Canada, you have a disproportionate culpability for that right being under threat in other countries, then that's the starting point for recognizing that you need to fix your mistake, you need to repair the damage. And that's where we get into things like overseas development assistance. We get into climate funds and funds to support countries that need to support their own green recovery. It begins from understanding why we have these obligations in the first place.
Well, Alana, let's talk. We were just mentioning about overseas development assistance, and you are leading a program called FEED. It's funded by the Canadian government. Tell us a little bit about how the program there is working, and specifically how it's responding to the threats that you're seeing from climate that you mentioned earlier.
At its core, it's about women's empowerment. And in the context of women in South Sudan, I think it's important to recognize that 80% of agricultural labor in this country comes from women. But women don't enjoy 80% of the income. They don't have 80% of the decision-making rights about how things are done or what's grown. In fact, it's quite the opposite. FEED is really trying to equip women to be leaders in food security and livelihoods. Some of the things that we're doing in the program are, especially in regards to climate smart agriculture, it's looking at farmer managed natural regeneration. It's looking at how we can do intercropping. It's about looking at how we can maintain biodiversity. We want to be able to position people that when things happen, when shocks occur, that we can position them to actually bounce back better. So Ms. Paul was talking about understanding your rights. We're in a situation where some women don't understand some of their basic human rights, but even the right to have a sustainable, to grow and live in a sustainable way so that their children and their children's children have something to look forward to as well.
The Green Party has been known for calling for increased investment. What's the approach to balancing the priorities of needs at home versus needs internationally?
Well, the two are connected. It's not an either or. And this is why I keep coming back to talking about the interconnectedness of things. We simply can't ensure our stability, our security, our economy, any of the things that we value here without ensuring that people who do not live in this country have access to those things as well. It's a completely false choice to suggest that you can have one without the other, or that one comes at the expense of the other. The pandemic, I would say, adds a additional urgency to what was already quite an urgent situation. We had obligations that we weren't meeting before in terms of our commitments for overseas development assistance, supporting global efforts related to climate adaptation and mitigation, et cetera, in the developing world. Now it's more important than ever that we do so. Otherwise, we are going to be erasing decades worth of progress towards meeting our sustainable development goals. It is something that is an excellent investment for us as well. And it's also something that is our ethical and moral responsibility to do as well. I do believe that people in Canada really are starting to get that because of what we have been through over the past year.
You've heard Ms. Paul talk about how we engage Canadians to, an interdependent world. You're a Canadian living and working on the other side of the world in South Sudan. What message might you have for Canadians here about the importance of investing in the work that you're doing there?
What I'm seeing is how it's affecting people in the here and now. I always thought of, we need to think about our futures, but actually it's really affecting people immediately. And it's devastating lives. You see that when there's floodings or when there's drought, then families, especially in South Sudan, resort to trying to get income any way they can, often associated with bride price. And that's often for girls who are under the age of 18. They become women who still don't have a voice. And so this thing that's devastating lives right here and now is going to have a compounded social impact in the future. I guess my message to Canadians is it's worth investing in this. We can't give up on hard places. We can't give up on complicated issues. And even in the midst of our own hardships, it's to our detriment if we don't keep caring. Coming out of Feed 1, we did see change. We did see transformation. There was an actual famine declaration in the midst of Feed 1. And we were able to see that the communities that we were working with were more resilient. We can continue doing more of this kind of work. It definitely will change lives.